Okay, let's unpack this. There's a bill making headlines that has really ignited a firestorm in Washington. Proponents are calling it one big, beautiful bill, right? But then you have one of its former close allies. Well, they've labeled it a disgusting abomination. Strong words. We're talking about a massive, roughly $3.8 trillion package championed by President Trump, and it's designed to dramatically reshape U.S. fiscal policy. But what makes this so captivating isn't just the size, huge as it is. It's the immense controversy it's stirring, especially the deep fissures it seems to be exposing within the president's own party. And this all comes right after its razor-thin passage in the Senate. So now it's back to the House for reapproval, and they've got this self-imposed July 4th deadline looming.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it, how this one piece of legislation really acts like a lens. It illuminates the intricate complexities of modern policymaking and the surprising influence of these high-profile figures, people outside traditional politics, and, of course, those fundamental ideological battles simmering away inside a major political party. So our mission today really is to cut through all that noise. We'll break down what's actually in this bill, peel back the layers on its projected impact, and try to figure out why it's causing such a stir, particularly among folks you might normally expect to be right there with the president's agenda. The goal is for you to walk away with a clear, thorough understanding, but without feeling, completely overwhelmed by it all.
Okay, so let's start with those promises grabbing the headlines.
Yeah.
We're hearing talk about this bill putting an estimated $10,000 back into the pockets of the average American family. I mean, that sounds almost like a financial miracle, right? A huge boost for households. But for you, the listener, what exactly does that entail? How would that actually work?
That's the core question, absolutely. The bill's proponents, they highlight several key things. First, there's the proposed elimination of taxes on overtime pay and tips. The White House claims this change alone could positively impact something like 90 million Americans. That's a lot of people.
90 million. Wow. Okay.
Then you've got an expansion of the child tax credit. They're aiming to increase it. The House version suggests $2,500 per child through 2028. The Senate version is a bit different, $2,200 annually. And crucially, the bill also extends those 2017 tax cuts. It makes the corporate tax rate of 21% permanent, and it trims the top individual income tax bracket from 37% down to 35%.
Okay.
And one more big one, especially for homeowners in, say, high-tax states. The state and local tax deduction, the SALT cap, that would see a big jump from $10,000 up to $40,000, but only for households earning under $500,000 a year.
Right. Those numbers, they certainly sound appealing just hearing them. But when you dig a bit deeper, are those benefits spread evenly, or do the independent analyses, do they paint a different picture about who really wins and maybe who loses out?
And this is where the story gets, more nuanced and where that reverse Robin Hood bill nickname comes into play. While the $10,000 figure is definitely a powerful talking point, independent analyses, from nonpartisan think tanks and others, they suggest it's really a maximum estimate, a best-case scenario for a very specific kind of family structure. And if you connect this to the wider impact, some language scholars have called it the reverse Robin Hood bill, precisely because they argue it orchestrates the largest upward wealth transfer in American history.
Upward transfer.
Yeah. For instance, some analyses project that the richest 20% of Americans could actually see an average boost of about $6,550 from this.
Okay, so a pretty significant gain for those already at the top. But what about the other end? I mean, who bears the burden if wealth is moving upwards?
That's the sobering counterpoint. The same analyses suggest the bottom 20% of Americans could, on average, actually lose money, maybe around $560 per year.
Lose money.
It's not just about who gets the tax breaks. This potential loss is directly tied to other big parts of the bill. We're talking about deep cuts to critical social safety net programs like Medicaid and SNA, the food stamp program. And there's also this broader push to shift more welfare responsibilities onto the individual states.
And beyond the sort of direct kitchen table impact on families, there's been so much talk about the bill's effect on the national debt. What are the projections looking like there? And what do those huge numbers actually mean for our long-term fiscal health?
This definitely raises that important question about fiscal responsibility. It's a core concern for many conservatives. The Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, they provide these independent analyses to Congress. They project this bill would add nearly $3.3 trillion to the national debt over the next decade.
$3.3 trillion.
Yeah, and just to give some perspective, that's almost $1 trillion more than the version that initially passed the House. So if this bill becomes law, the total U.S. debt could potentially soar to $40 trillion by 2035.
40 trillion. It's hard to even grasp that number.
It is. And what it means is potentially a heavier burden for future generations, right? Increased interest payments that take money away from other priorities. And just general concerns about long-term economic stability. We've already seen the financial markets react. Moody's, the big credit rating agency,
Yeah.
they actually downgraded U.S. debt from the top AAA rating down to AA1. And they directly cited concerns over this bill's long-term impact on the nation's creditworthiness. That's a pretty big signal to global investors.
And we even heard really strong words from Elon Musk, right? Someone not usually shy with his opinions. He called it a disgusting abomination, warned of crushingly unsustainable debt. He specifically mentioned it massively increasing the deficit to, $2.5 trillion in just the next fiscal year alone.
Exactly. His words, they really reflect that significant fiscal conservative concern about the sheer scale of the borrowing involved here. It suggests a view that, the government is spending way beyond its means, setting us up for a pretty perilous financial future.
So, okay, beyond the tax cuts and this huge contentious debate over the debt, what else is actually packed into this big, beautiful bill? Because clearly way more than just a tax package, right? It's generating so much heat and such different reactions.
That's right. If you look at the bigger picture, this bill fundamentally reshapes several really key areas of American policy, often reflecting conservative priorities. Take defense and border security, for example. It allocates a substantial $150 billion in new resources to the Department of Defense. That's a move that could push the annual military budget past the $1 trillion mark.
Wow.
And it also earmarks around $175 billion for immigration and border enforcement. That includes significant funding, about $46.5 billion specifically for more border walls and expanded detention capacity. Plus, there's a notable $13.5 billion set aside for state reimbursement grants. For border spending, Texas, for instance, is expected to get the largest share for things like Operation Lone Star.
Okay, and what about health care? That's always a hot-button issue, especially with major legislation like this.
Oh, it's a huge component, absolutely. In healthcare restructuring, particularly affecting Medicaid, the bill introduces increased co-payments and periodic eligibility checks for recipients who are above the federal poverty line. What's also been highly contested is a provision, it's known as the Crenshaw Amendment, that would prohibit Medicaid from covering gender-affirming care.
Okay.
And on top of that, stricter verification requirements would be imposed on people participating in Medicaid expansion. The CBO, they project these reforms could potentially disqualify around 11.8 million Americans from coverage by 2034.
11 million.
Yeah. Now, Democratic lawmakers, understandably, have been very vocal, claiming this slashes healthcare for maybe as many as 17 million people. And they're raising alarms about potential rural hospital closures. Although, it is worth noting, the Senate version did double a rural hospital fund from $25 billion up to $50 billion, ostensibly, to cushion some of that potential impact.
And we also heard about changes to SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. What's happening there?
Yes, SNAP also sees pretty deep cuts and significant changes. It proposes imposing new work requirements on able-bodied individuals. That includes some parents and older Americans, too. And it makes the sign-up eligibility rules more stringent. The intent, from a conservative perspective, is often framed as encouraging self-sufficiency and reducing dependency on government aid.
That sounds like a major shift in social safety net policy. What about energy policy? Is the bill pushing us towards clean energy or away from it?
This is a really significant point of contention for a lot of people. The bill includes major clean energy rollbacks. It phases out tax credits for things like electric vehicles, solar installations, wind turbine manufacturing, credits that were established just a couple of years ago in the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act.
Right.
This could certainly impact companies like Tesla, other domestic automakers who rely on those incentives. In fact, the House Freedom Caucus, a group of very conservative lawmakers, they actually refer to these credits as part of the Green New Scam. That signals their strong opposition to what they see as excessive government subsidies for renewables.
So rolling back green incentives.
Exactly. And conversely, the bill heavily incentivizes fossil fuel development. It does that through new tax breaks for things like natural gas pipeline expansions and offshore drilling platforms.
So it really is a dramatic pivot on energy policy. And speaking of contentious elements, the debt ceiling increase and what some people are calling pork spending. What's the deal there?
Yeah, this is another major red flag for fiscal conservatives. The bill includes a massive increase to the statutory debt limit. It raises it by $4 trillion. Elon Musk even claimed it's actually a record $5 trillion, effectively giving the Treasury what critics are calling a blank check to borrow right through 2026.
A blank check.
That's the critique. Senator Rand Paul, who's been a very vocal critic, he notably called this fiscal malpractice, just indicating a deep concern about the lack of fiscal discipline. And Musk also famously criticized what he called the Porky Pig Party, referring to upwards of $500 billion in district-specific allocations. You know, things like specific airport expansions, highway overpasses, dredging projects, labeling it all as pure pork. It's that classic conservative critique of wasteful government spending finding its way into big bills.
And were there any specific sort of wins for individual senators, particular provisions that got tucked in, maybe to secure those crucial votes?
Oh, absolutely. When you have a bill this tightly contested, individual senators can wield pretty significant influence. That's just how it works. We definitely saw specific provisions secured by Senators John Cornyn and Ted Cruz, both from Texas. It kind of illustrates the horse trading that goes on. Senator Cornyn, for instance, successfully pushed to increase those state reimbursement grants for border spending. He got it up to $13.5 billion, which was up from $12 billion in the House version. Senator Cruz secured a really fascinating provision, a $1,000 government-seeded investment account. They're branding them as Trump accounts, one for every American child. The idea is the funds could be used for education, maybe a house down payment, or even starting a small business.
Interesting.
Yeah. And he also secured a $1,700 annual tax credit for contributions people make to nonprofits that grant K-12 scholarships. It's framed as promoting school choice.
Right.
And one more from Cruz, he aims to auction off parts of the government-owned wireless spectrum to private companies. Proponents argue that would spur technological innovation by opening up valuable airwaves.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, politically speaking. This bill, even though it's a Republican priority, it has just exposed these incredibly deep divisions, not just between the parties, which you expect, but dramatically within the GOP itself. It sounds like it's been an absolute political pressure cooker.
Yeah, what's fascinating, going back, is how close that initial vote was in the House. Remember, it passed by just 215, 214-1 back on May 22nd. And what really stood out then was that two Republicans known for being fiscally conservative, Thomas Massie and Warren Davidson, they unexpectedly sided with the Democrats. Their stated reasons were concerns mainly over that SALT cap issue and income inequality.
So even early on, trouble brewing.
Exactly. Then, when the bill moved over to the Senate, the divisions just seemed to intensify. It led to a truly tumultuous floor debate, mounting intra-party friction.
I remember hearing about that marathon session. It sounded pretty wild. How did that play out?
It was indeed a marathon. The Senate endured this grueling 26, maybe 27-hour marathon voting session. They often call it a vote-a-rama.
Vote-a-rama.
Yeah, it's basically a parliamentary procedure. It allows senators to propose and vote on dozens, sometimes hundreds, of amendments, one after another. Often they're designed to put political pressure on opponents, force tough votes on tricky issues. Anyway, after all that, the final Senate vote was incredibly close, 51-50. Vice President J.D. Vance had to come in and cast the decisive, tie-breaking vote.
Oh. So who were the Republican dissenters in the Senate then, the ones who voted no?
There were 3 Republican senators who ultimately voted against the bill: Susan Collins of Maine, Tom Tillis of North Carolina, and Rand Paul of Kentucky. Senator Collins, even though she successfully fought to get that $50 billion rural hospital fund included, which would benefit her state, she still voted no. She said her objections went far beyond that one funding issue. Senator Tillis actually announced he wouldn't seek re-election after reportedly being badgered by Trump over his opposition. He cited concerns about the healthcare cuts and the potential impact on rural hospitals back in North Carolina.
Quite a statement.
It was.
Yeah.
And Senator Rand Paul, well, he was a consistent, very vocal critic throughout, especially of the debt limit increase, calling it fiscal malpractice, even vowing to filibuster. After it passed, he publicly declared, "The big, not-so-beautiful bill has passed," clearly showing his displeasure.
That's quite a show of defiance from within the party ranks.
Yeah.
Was there one crucial vote then that sort of saved the bill in the Senate?
Absolutely. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. After expressing initial skepticism and engaging in significant negotiation, she ultimately backed the bill. Her vote was absolutely essential to get them to that 50-vote threshold needed for the VP to break the tie.
Right.
She managed to secure some provisions aimed at sparing Alaska from some of the proposed food stamp cuts, though her efforts to lessen the Medicaid changes for her state apparently fell short. But it just illustrates the power individual senators can have in a chamber that's so tightly divided.
And then, of course, you had this unexpected intervention from Elon Musk.
Yeah.
He's not a politician, obviously, but he clearly carries immense weight.
Musk's intervention was truly unprecedented, I think. You have to remember he's a significant donor, reportedly pledged over $250 million to Trump's 2024 campaign. And he even formerly headed that Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, for Trump.
Right, DOGE.
So his public denouncement of this bill was a really powerful statement. And he didn't just criticize it lightly. He issued a direct, almost scathing threat. He said, quote, "Every member of Congress who campaigned on reducing government spending and then immediately voted for the biggest debt increase in history should hang their head in shame."
Wow.
And then, even more pointedly, "They will lose their primary next year if it is the last thing I do on this earth."
That is a serious political threat, especially coming from outside the conventional political arena. What does that tell us about the evolving role of major donors, do you think?
Well, it seems to signify a pretty significant shift in donor influence, doesn't it? High-profile figures like Musk, they seem no longer content with just, passive check writing. They appear to be seeking ideological conformity, and they seem willing to actively reward or punish lawmakers based on that, wielding what many observers see as unprecedented leverage.
So it could change the calculation for lawmakers.
It certainly could. It might fundamentally alter how lawmakers weigh donor interests against, say, their constituents' needs or even their own party's platform. Of course, the counter-argument is also out there that Musk's opposition, especially regarding the clean energy rollbacks, might neatly align with his own corporate interests, given Tesla's business.
Okay, so the bill squeaked through the Senate, but now it's back to the House for reapproval with all the Senate's changes baked in. What kind of reception is it facing there? Is it smooth sailing?
Definitely not smooth sailing. It's facing significant headwinds, actually. The Senate's changes, particularly those strengthened Medicaid cuts, have really amplified concerns among some House Republicans. You've got members of the House Freedom Caucus, folks like Chip Roy of Texas, who have already drawn a line in the sand, basically, over the bill's provisions. They're particularly focused on their desire to fully repeal those Inflation Reduction Act tax credits, the ones they call the Green New Scam.
Right.
Roy has openly threatened to vote against this bill if it doesn't go far enough in cutting spending, in his view. And given the extremely slim House majority and the fact that Democrats are expected to be unanimously opposed, Speaker Mike Johnson just cannot afford to lose more than a handful of Republican votes. He needs to get this across the finish line by the president's deadline. It's a real tightrope walk for him.
So wrapping this up then, what does all of this really mean for you, the listener? This deep dive into the one big, beautiful bill. It really reveals a monumental legislative effort, doesn't it, with very direct implications for your finances, potentially your health care, and certainly the national debt. We've seen these core tensions playing out, that delicate balance between promised tax relief and these proposed spending cuts, the disparate impact this bill could have on different income levels, and this ongoing, very public struggle within the Republican Party itself to define its fiscal identity, its direction.
Yeah, and this bill, assuming it ultimately becomes law, it really is set to shape the economic and political landscape for years to come, well into 2035, based on some provisions. So the question for you to think about is, what stands out to you the most from this really contentious legislative battle? How do you see these debates over debt, government spending, and this kind of intra-party loyalty playing out, especially as we look ahead towards the upcoming 2026 primary cycles? And maybe most importantly, what does this whole saga suggest about the future direction of our nation's fiscal policy? It's a question I think that will continue to resonate long after this particular bill's fate is finally decided.